Welcome to Blog Talk Radio in high fidelity.
Join us for today's episode of the Utopian Realities Slope, Save Life on Planet Earth Blog Talk Radio show, bringing you solution bearers with practical, proven, scientific ways to help you eliminate global level irradiation and extinction level threats from your body, and bringing forward the means to restore and sustain global waters, air, soil, and sentient life. Welcome.
Greetings, this is Diaba, also known as Lisa Wolf, your host. Welcome to the Utopian Realities, from concept to planetary restoration slope, save and sustain life on planet Earth, Earth Aid Sunday Solution Bearers Forum, where we bring you solution bearers who can help us to mend the sacred hoop of life. Thank you for joining us this Sunday, November 20th, as Earth Aid Now Radio focuses our attention once again on Fukushima solutions in action. As always, feel free to join the live chat on the program page, and with questions or comments, phone 845-277-9359. Joining us today is Russell Anderson, who will explore the implications for the modern world of reproductions and deployment of the T.T. Brown patents and new and exciting updates to Spintronic Inc.'s prototyping efforts of Professor John R.R. Searles and the late Dr. Paul Brown's Spintronic converter work. And an hour into the show, we're expecting David Yurt, inventor, author, and physicist, who will speak to us about his recent letter to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and the world of getting suppressed life-saving technologies to the world regardless. Of course, here at Slope, Save and Sustain Life on Planet Earth, Earth Aid Now, we support the full manifestation of sterile technology, which has shown to ameliorate radiation and thereby help in the healing of the Earth and all life, as well as providing space travel and zero-E energy, the types of positive breakthrough technology we fully support. Let me give you some background on Russell Anderson. Russell holds a degree in software engineering from the Chubb Institute and has lectured on non-conventional energy and propulsion systems since July 1990 at the International Tesla Society Conference. He has built and operated non-conventional energy and propulsion systems since the late 1980s. In June 2000, Anderson demonstrated working T.T. Brown flying discs at the second International Anti-Gravity Conference in Reno, Nevada. He presented his paper on anti-gravity technology, Beamships technology, a reworking of early 20th century discoveries, for the Institute for New Energy Symposium in August 2002, published in New Energy Technologies Journal and the Journal of New Energy in 2002 and 2003, respectively. He also presented a 3-meter diameter, full-scale mock-up model of Searle inverse gravity vehicle and lectured alongside Professor John R.R. Searle at the Tesla Tech 2010 conference. He has lectured on dynamic electromagnetic propulsion and the Searle effect generator, the Searle IGV, and Tesla technology every year since 2009 at the Tesla Days Tesla Foundation conferences, and has given a lecture and demo of anti-gravity propulsion for MUFON. In 2012, at the first Global Breakthrough Energy Movement Conference, www.globalbem.com, in Hilversum, Holland, Anderson lectured on magnetic motors SEG, and IGB technology. In December 2012, Anderson became CEO for Searle Aerospace, Inc. In August 2013, Anderson, in charge of operating and maintaining SEG demo equipment with the STI team, traveled to Beijing, China. September 2013, Russell became R&D engineer with STI and lectured on SEG and IGB technology, representing Team Searle and STI at the second Global BEM conference in October 13. In January 2014, Anderson lectured on SEG and IGB technology at the second annual Tesla Memorial Conference. He lectured in 2014 through 2016 in Albuquerque, New Mexico, as part of the Tesla Tech Extraordinary Technology lecture series in support of spintronics work. In October 2016, Russell was promoted to Director of R&D for Spintronics Incorporated and was tasked with the redevelopment of technology built and employed by Professor John R. Searle and Paul Brown, Ph.D. Russell?
Yes. Hi, Lisa.
Hi. You recently sent me your abstract, which I'd like to share with listeners, if you don't mind.
No problem. Go right ahead. Thanks, Lisa.
Okay. Let's see. In Abstract 2017, titled Beamships, The Biefeld-Brown Effect and Warp Drive by Russell Anderson, Director of Research and Development for Spintronics, Inc. Russell says, the concept of an all-electric aerospace craft with no moving parts was initiated over a century ago by the Serbian electrical wizard Nikola Tesla, who lit the world at the turn of the 20th century with his revolutionary polyphase AC electric current. In 1916 to 1917, Dr. Francis Nefer performed meticulous mass deflection experiments with lead spheres suspended by wires and electrified inside shielded and unshielded containers, showing the force was able to penetrate Faraday cages. Before 1905, George S. Pigott was routinely suspending small silver spheres and other materials using the electrostatic force field from a specially designed Wimshurst machine in a glass container under several atmospheres to raise the current and power level. Groundbreaking pioneer Thomas Townsend Brown discovered in the early 1920s that high voltage, low amperage electricity causes movement in objects, and more specifically capacitor configurations. January 10, 1929, Einstein released his Zur-Einlichtungsfeld theory, or the unified field theory for gravitation and electricity, in Annalen der Physik on January 12th to the New York Times with great fanfare. Russell says, I will show that gravity is a simple electrostatic effect. RCA Laboratories in New Jersey in 1959 showed that negative charges fall upwards instead of downwards in a gravitational field. Nobel Prize winner Dr. Gabriel Lippmann showed that negatively charged bodies exhibit less inertia than neutral bodies with no net charge. He called it the inertia of static electricity. Thomas Townsend Brown's simple equation works very well for optimizing force in electrogravitics devices and systems. The unifying field is the electrical field because it can produce gravitational acceleration fields as well as magnetism, permanent and temporary. My lecture will include my reproduction of Thomas Townsend Brown's groundbreaking electrokinetic apparatus with 1 meter diameter flying saucers that I performed live at the second Anti-Gravity Conference in June of 2000 in Reno, Nevada, followed by a history of electrogravitics and electrogravitics patents, and presentations of the facts that show the military was very interested in what was covertly starting to be known as warp drive. Next, I will present my research data table completed in July of 2002, showing what factors increase power and thrust of my Beamship trademarked levitating giant apparatus, and how I came to achieve the largest size, weight, and highest efficiency and angular momentum in the world thus far with the T.T. Brown electrokinetic apparatus in anti-gravitational mode. I will have ongoing public demonstrations in the Albuquerque Conference and COFE, C-O-F-E, of my T.T. Brown flying saucers and my celebrated Beamship equilateral hovering anti-gravity flying models for sale. I will conclude with what the implications are for the modern world with open reproductions and deployment of the T.T. Brown patents and new and exciting updates to our Spintronics Inc. prototyping efforts in the United States of Professor John R. Searles and the late Dr. Paul Brown's spintronic converter work that holds astounding implications for the entire Earth and all sentient life. I've stopped using the word human, Russell, because I've been having education on the word human means monster, and it's not something we want to be calling ourselves. It's a New World Order catch term. I'm sorry, I caught it at the last word I was going to read.
I sure think it's sweet.
Yes. Welcome. Listeners, Russell and I met because I was looking for technology solutions to the global irradiation problem that we're all facing. And amongst other things, the Searle technology actually ameliorates radiation. But it's... So, Russell, what are you going to talk with us today about? We've just heard this amazing abstract.
Yeah, well, that's my work, and it's not really stressed in our educational systems or our media or anything, any information, unless you go online and search it out. Thank God we live in the information age. I used to have to tease out of the library, very carefully. Yes. With bibliographies and things like that I found in various books and other publications about electrogravitics, electrogravity, anti-gravity, warp drive, faster than light drive, and what successes there have been on Earth, and ideas that really parallel what we see in life of UFOs and what they can do. They're like, been teasing us and showing us, just like, hey guys, look what we can do. What's taking you guys so long? And that sort of thing. And, with this type of propulsion, we're talking about no more pollution, of course. They have no carbon footprint. These devices that been seen in great numbers since World War II, especially, have no visible means of propulsion. And certainly nothing, is coming out the tailpipe. There's no reaction mass, no room to carry any fuel. In the small models anyway, small scout ships and other ships. But my goodness, we're talking about the ability to do, what people see, what we see on Star Trek, what's been, talked about in science fiction since the 1920s and 30s. Going to other planets and other stars. And my gosh, we know of, thousands of other planets now. We didn't even know of any planets outside our own star system when I was a kid, even when I was in college. It's only in the very recent era that we've had the technology to observe other planets and the footprints of other planets. And so we have other planets to go along with these other civilizations. And, these other civilizations that seem to be flitting about in our skies worldwide don't seem to use signal intelligence as we do. They don't seem to use Hertzian radio as we do for signal intelligence. They seem to have a more subtle form of communication, because they must have communication between ships or between worlds even. So they're using something akin to what has also been developed on Earth, but not well publicized, unless you go online, is scalar transceivers and scalar technology, which is really Tesla technology. Before World War I and before World War II, Tesla was routinely sending signals faster than light, about 17.5 times faster than light, through the Earth and through the air. He also proved that the Earth was an electrically conductive sphere, and we are immersed basically in a spherical capacitor formed between the negatively charged Earth's surface and the positively charged ionosphere, at least the surface that's facing us. So that gives you a little bit of a handle on what is the true nature of gravity. It's not some mysterious, warp in space, although we use that term interchangeably with electrogravitics. It's more basic than that. We're talking about ether theory that Tesla believed in and Einstein couldn't bring himself to, that ether theory is the correct theory, not so much relativity. There are things that are correct about relativity, but they're really maybe testing the wrong hypothesis. But ether theory definitely makes it, and quantum mechanics works as well.
How so, testing the wrong hypothesis?
Instead of using a visual model of a ball on a rubber sheet for a gravitational field, which only gives you a two-dimensional view, think about what's happening when you have a charged sphere and you have another uncharged body approaching it. If it's what's coming out of the sphere is a lot of charge in a small space, the other object is going to be first attracted and then violently repelled. And Francis Nieper, around just after the turn of the century, I guess the second decade like we are, second decade of a century, he proved that this force can penetrate shielded and unshielded containers. So it can penetrate Faraday cage, so the force can't be purely electromagnetic if it's doing that. That's very important to know, that these forces, these electrostatic forces, are interchangeable from gravitation. And what we're living in is a displacement current in a parallel plate spherical capacitor. And when you think of it that way, instead of like a rubber sheet, and which it would take ungodly amounts of mass, which it does, to bend the sheet, or energy, it does, thousands to millions of volts, but in a small space. And my paper shows also, when you have that kind of electrostatic potential over a larger surface area, the force is magnified. That's one of the tenets of a more complicated Biefeld ground effect equation. And I also showed in my data table.
Okay. Well, Professor Anderson, your students are here. I'm teasing you. But
the titles aren't important. It's what we do with what we have that's important.
So, continue teaching, please.
Well, we've entered the time where every man and woman must be a leader. We cannot look to someone, some leader, some messiah to save us. We have to save ourselves. Each man and woman has to be, knowledgeable about various disciplines and various things, and learn history. That's one of the most important things, because a very, very famous man somewhere, I don't know if it was Schopenhauer or somebody, but said those who do not study history will be condemned to repeat it. I think that was my ninth grade history teacher of world history or something like that. But anyway, study history, because in so many ways it's being repeated, and that's a history that we can never go back to. We have to be cognizant of the fact that we have to become knowledgeable. I still believe that I am my brother's keeper, and it's incumbent on all of us that have the ability to do something about improving the human condition to just go ahead and do so. We need heroes. We need people that are willing to put themselves out on a limb and on the line to help his fellow man and woman. And we have to be aware of what's going on all around us, all around the world, here at home, just everywhere. And just go online. You have a wealth of knowledge, people, at your fingertips that we didn't have when I was in school, when I was going to college. We didn't have the internet yet. But it's very important that you access that neural net, that new Alexandria, a vast library called the internet, for information about electrogravity, which is over unity and free energy, and other things that are important as well. Medical cures for cancer and other ailments that may have been either glossed over or suppressed, or both. And also things that ameliorate radiation, like the Searle apparatus and what we're working on, the Brown and Searle apparatus. And realize that we are in an era where, every man and woman must be a knowledge person, and that is a leader. A leader is a knowledge person, a person that has a vast amount of knowledge on which to draw to make intelligent decisions about what directions to do, so time and money aren't wasted, and effort's not wasted, and things get done much faster for everybody.
Yes. And Russell, since I'm going to assume that some of our listeners haven't heard before, could you please explain how Searle technology happens to when it's operating ameliorate radiation?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, there was one experiment, and it was either at Sussex University or Middlesex University, I forget, one of those universities in southeastern England, where they had a 3-ring 69 or 72 runner plate and runner Searle effect generator, or we call them spintronic generators now. We don't want to use Searle's name because he's copyrighted it, and that's okay. Placed inside the inner ring of a spintronic generator a vial of radioactive material, radioactive compound or isotope, something like that, and it's ionizing radiation. That was placed inside the inner ring of an operating unit, and within a very short time, minutes, the radiation was no longer being emitted, and that wouldn't happen until, double the half-life, basically, of this radioactive material. So what we're seeing is something that is happening when Professor Searle explains it like this, which makes a lot of sense because this is the way he's explained this technology. The device is putting back in those materials that are basically making it unstable, making it want to fission and release particles. So those particles, those fundamental particles, are being converted from the ether that's all around us, which is a pre-physical state of matter anyway. The device is basically a Maxwell's demon, so to speak, and putting back all those fundamental particles. And that's also how it works. Basically, it's tapping the zero-point energy, as my friend and colleague Moray King likes to say, that this is a device that is coherent with and congruent with nature, and it is indeed polarizing the vacuum and tapping the zero-point energy in a fundamental way that Nikola Tesla said that mankind would one day do in some of his famous writings, including his book, My Inventions. He said, ergo, many generations will pass where a man will be able to access energy at any point in the universe, harnessing the wheelwork of nature. And I think basically, literally, the device, the units, harness the wheelwork of nature while promoting a clean environment in so many ways. You have these in the home. If you say you're unfortunate enough to live in a home where there's radon, you don't have to worry. Your home value is suddenly shot up because the ionizing radiation that is produced by the radon is no longer ionizing, is no longer radiating. There's nothing now to harm your health in that home. So highly recommended for that purpose as well. And then, of course, for anywhere there's been environmental catastrophe brought about by nuclear energy, such as Fukushima, of course, and Daiichi and Chernobyl, all those places could be made safe, clean, and habitable again with this technology in the proper application, which is not that hard to do. So this is a device that lends itself to funding from investors of vision. And, of course, we're still seeking funding to make this happen, but good things are on the way. And that's all I'm at liberty to say right now.
Okay. So as far as any way that people can help, can get in touch, can learn more?
Yeah, well, they can, of course, give me a call, give me a shout-out, my email, which is russanderson3@hotmail.com, just the number 3. Or, give me a call, my phone number, and also go to our website. It has all the contact info there, too. See if you're in the qualified investor who's in the position that has the wherewithal to fund us, please contact us, seek us out. We're at www.spintronicgenerator.com, singular, spintronic, spintronicgenerator.com. I noticed on the photos it said spintronicsgenerator.com. They won't get to it like that. Just go to spintronicgenerator.com. And I'm also the webmaster, new webmaster of Spintronics Inc. So,
Russell, given the next phase of funding, when would you all see the possibility of beginning actual manufacturing for things like home units?
Well, first we have to set up the new facility. And I believe that's going to be right there in Reno, Nevada. And that would take, working at breakneck pace, probably 2 to 3 months on the outside. I don't want to underestimate how long it would take to get that up. I already have submitted a budget with links to equipment we'll need, the very basics of equipment, and running a laboratory/office. And basically, I also came up with a timeline, and that tells us what we need to do. It's a roadmap also, a timeline and a flow chart of each step in the prototyping and manufacture and testing, and what we need to see. And if we don't see, we go back to the beginning of the step. And each step is broken down, so we just go phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, etc. About 8 or 9 phases in the prototyping operation, and the document is fluid. It's in a Word document. It's ever changing as new information comes in, and that's what we have to work with, so we can make this reality in due time. I'm guessing, and this is just a guess, mind you, anywhere from 6 to 12 to 18 months at the outside, 6, 12 to 18 months with a minimum of 6 months to start to do some real testing on what we're making, what we're manufacturing, what we're going to be manufacturing in Nevada.
Well, I very much look forward to that. As you know, I understand that...
you and me, I've been waiting for this for 30 years.
Yeah, I understand that the Kesh people have opened a factory, I believe, in Arizona, and now they're working with plasma And are you familiar with what Kesh is up to at all, Russ?
You know what? I became part of that research sharing program, but I never really took advantage of it because I had my hands full, totally with Searle Brown converters and that sort of thing. So I haven't had to look at his apparati and his theory, but I've got some very, very basic information about it, and it seems fascinating. It's all the things that I certainly lecture about and have been talking about.
Yes, it is very interesting, and right now, I guess because the plasma, it seems, I may not be using the right word, when the Magrov generator is attached to the electrical system, the plasma says like it coats the wires. It's like it's bringing things in from, and then the energy usage goes down, over time from the power company. New technologies. Well, talk to us a little bit about back to gravity and magnetics and electromagnetic acceleration and propulsion. What's going on? Can you help listeners visualize this?
Yeah. Visualize Coulomb's attractive forces going up basically geometrically, exponentially, as you're applying opposite charges to a system of positive and negative charges that are isolated electrically. Because of the nature of protons and electrons, or more fundamentally, positive and electric charges, the forces are never, quote-unquote, equal and opposite. You're going to see a tremendous force in one direction more than in the other direction, and that can be tapped. That effect can be tapped for momentum and power and conservation of energy. In fact, you can circumvent the conservation of energy with such a parallel plate apparatus, as has been shown by men such as George S. Pigott at the early part of the 20th century, 1903-04, with his anti-gravity work, where he was levitating all sorts of items with a Wimshurst generator under glass, basically under several atmospheres of pressure, to raise the current level. And he was getting force field effects and strange light effects on objects, patterns of blue dots, as well as a dark band and the equatorial regions. And he came up with some really interesting theories about gravitation. And basically, from my research, I concluded as far back as 1986 that gravitation was a simple electrostatic effect. And we can see that conclusion also in very important seminal books like Ether Technology, and that's by Rho Sigma. It was written in, published in 1977, and Rho Sigma was a pseudonym for the late Dr. Rolf Schafrank. That's R-O-L-F, Schafrank, and he was one of the original Operation Paperclip German scientists who were brought over, and they were loyal Nazis, and they were absolved of all their war crimes and brought up over here semi-secretly, and they made no secret. Well, I guess they really made no secret of the fact that we had Nazi scientists giving us our entire manned and unmanned ballistic missile program. The Redstone of Redstone Arsenal, where Sir Frank worked, was basically nothing more than a V2, which Hitler called the A4, which they rained down on London during the Blitz. And it was devastating, a weapon that you could do nothing about because it traveled faster than sound. And this was revolutionary, but based on Robert Goddard's work and patents, which the Nazis went crazy over. They said, this is fantastic. And where the work of Goddard, eventually the funding dried up because our government lost interest, and they didn't think that rockets could be used significantly in warfare or for space work. Well, of course, all that changed after World War II. But it wasn't just rocketry that the Germans made use of, the Third Reich made use of. They also made use of the incredible saucer technology of people like Italian scientist Alonso and Miete and Schreiber and Habermas, and of course Victor Schauberger, the Austrian scientist who was actually a natural scientist. He observed nature and observed how trout and fish seemed to stand motionless in cold running mountain streams where they would have had to ordinarily put up an awful effort. Certain places in the stream, they could stand motionless and not put forth any effort at all. Same thing, how trout would levitate up into a waterfall. They would find the coldest part of the waterfall, which was a reversed spiral of flow, and just levitate right up into the waterfall with almost no effort. This is what was happening. So he designed and built trout turbines and logging flumes, which would make use of this effect, that basically you could call a suction effect. And he reasoned that when air or water is rotated into a Fibonacci spiral of ever-increasing curvature, you get this force in one direction. And with a lot of power, you can get levitation. So he built a tornado home power generator, zero-point energy coherer, and there are many photos of him with that. And he also built some devices called repulsines, which look like a typical UFO in model form, which reportedly levitated when supplied with this rotating current of air or water, which wants to orbit and spiral in Fibonacci spirals. You can see this all through nature, the antelope horn, the Cuda antelope, or seashells, spiral seashells, or the way rivers want to meander when they're on a level, flat plane. All kind of things like that. And it's very important to note that these effects are produced also electrically when the power level gets high enough. And it's the electrical field that turns out to be the unifying field, because electrostatics basically is gravitation. And there's a paper, very important paper, by Obolensky that talks about the magnetic force is faster than light. That's the title of the paper. And he wrote another one also called The Gravitational Force is Faster Than Light. We can think of gravitational force and magnetic currents as nothing more than ether currents, and gravitation as a converging flux of ether, electrostatic, electromagnetic fields, same thing. So there's a unifying field. And take a little drink of water here. It's very important to realize that science has conceded, if you get up into the PhD levels, science concedes that the fabric of space is moving many times the speed of light. And imagine that flux impinging on matter. In other words, you have a three-dimensional, visualize somehow if you can, the rubber sheet with the ball in the middle of it, but in 3 dimensions. Well, that wouldn't be a hole, that would be a sphere. So you have a converging flux of gravitation. Basically, matter is an ether sink. Think about very simple experiments like the Casimir effect, where you have 2 uncharged parallel plates and they're pushed together by an unseen force called the Casimir effect. And you have devices that make use of this effect, that make use of charged foliated conductors that Casimir and another scientist built for proof of concept to show that, using this effect is so basic you can get power right from the vacuum. And it's a battery where you get a small amount of power, electrical energy, from this device that's adiabatic. You don't have to put energy into it. It's basically cohering the zero-point energy. And I read about this device, not in the media and not online, although you can see about it online, from a book by Moray King, my great friend and colleague Moray King. His book he has a couple of books I really like. The first book I read in the late 1980s called Tapping the Zero Point Energy. Highly recommend that. I lectured Morey many times. He's a really great guy. Hung out with him. He's a really great person. And also, what other book? Quest for Zero Point Energy, which came a little later. And he presented that to me as a gift after my lecture in Salt Lake City, in Salt Lake City, Utah, where I did a demonstration of anti-gravity and a lecture there, too, as well, for the Institute for New Energy. And they published my paper with the data table and everything at the, it's winter 2003, INE, Journal of the INE, Journal of New Energy, Volume 7, Number 1, from 2003. And my paper in there is called Beamship Technology, a Successful Application of T.T. Brown's Electrokinetic Apparatus. And basically I talk about in the abstract of that how Nikola Tesla came up with the idea of an all-electric aero spacecraft with no moving parts that could just cruise around, at any speed, and it could be quite gigantic and look something like a giant cigar. Coincidentally, photos started to be taken of such giant cigars. Originally, it was thought they were airships until, it was realized that they could, take off at like amazing speeds in the blink of an eye. Airships can't normally do that. So what you have seems to be like a mothership for smaller craft, but this cigar-shaped apparatus, there are films archived of that hovering over various localities around the world, and they're quite ominous looking, but somehow they're non-threatening, and they're just either big silver things or usually big and black, jet black, and they're gigantic. And just a side note here, starting around 1980 or 81, I started having lucid dreams of being in my neighborhood and looking up into the sky and seeing freaking gigantic UFOs that were, looked like they were miles in diameter and just, hovering there. And I got a feeling that somehow I would see this for real in my lifetime. And turns out later I did smaller models, but I've had a couple of dreams like that of day or night seeing gigantic UFOs, and really, had an impact on me as well. When you have lucid dreams that are about, quite earth-shaking things like this, not that they shook the earth, but, to one's, notions of who we are and our place in the universe and the hierarchy of beings that surely populate this universe.
Totally. Well, I always wonder, did the military, the British and the Americans continue building their old technology, do you think, even though they, have...
Pretty sure. It's pretty sure that they did, and they'd be crazy not to.
Mm-hmm.
From their point of view.
Well, then they could easily ameliorate the radiation themselves.
Yeah, they could. They could easily ameliorate a lot of things like hunger, poverty, famine, war, racial bigotry and religious hatred, but they choose not to, which is insane in itself. I remember reading about Billy Meyer and his contact with the Pleiadians or Pleiadian race. The aliens are a little more evolved, a little more advanced than we are, from another dimension. They said we are, quote unquote, an insane society rushing madly headlong towards destruction, toward its own self-destruction. And that stuck with me. And from what I've seen, what I see, what's going on, what continues to go on all around the world without abatement is man's inhumanity to man. I think, my God, how right they are. And it's up to us to do something about it, because it's us that's involved. You know, no one is going to come down and save our asses. We've got to do that ourselves. And that's what they keep telling us. They can only plant ideas, plant seeds, and hope that people will listen and get other people to listen too, and saying, you know, we must not, you know, keep fighting each other. We can come together to solve these problems. And it's going to be a lot cheaper than war.
This is true. Maybe now would be a good
and money
to, you know, remember what the stakes are. That, you know, we are going through, if we don't turn this around, we are going through an extinction level event right now, folks. And I was honored to receive an email message from former Ambassador Mitsuhi Murata of Japan that he asked me to share. And I don't know that I'll read the whole thing. He attached an article by Yoichi Shimatsu of Rents.com, but I will read Ambassador Murata's message on part of Yoichi Shimatsu's article. Dear Miss Lisa Wolf, I received this mail this morning. Just a glance at it will help the world to be awakened to the real and present dangers emanating from Fukushima. Japan's retreat from the Tokyo Olympic 2020 in order to consecrate maximum efforts to cope with the unstoppable Fukushima disaster is urgently needed. The mobilization of human wisdom on the widest possible scale is indispensable. With warmest regards, Mitsuhi Murata. And then he shares an article titled Fukushima Nuclear Waste Annihilates Pacific Ecosystem by Yoichi Shimatsu, exclusive to Rents, dated May 24th, 2016. And I'll read a portion of this. Strolling over the cliffs in Southern California, I looked down at a white sand beach, pimpled with a crimson rash along the high tide line. Close up, the red dots turned out to be hundreds of thousands of thumb-sized crustaceans of the species Pleuronchodus planicus that resemble tiny lobsters. Most of those pelagic red crabs, or Longostela, also known as tuna crabs, were sprawled dead on the sand, tangled in strands of kelp, or alive, but listless inside the rocky tide pools. The crustaceans appeared to be fresh, without signs of injury or disease, and there was no stench of the fish market. Seagulls had left the smaller limbs at the water's edge, but soon quit the all-you-can-eat buffet, indicating their ability to detect a hidden toxin. The Langostilla kill-off cannot be called an act of nature, since my dosimeter detected radiation levels of between 0.12 microsieverts per hour and 0.18 microsieverts in their bodies. The official safety level for human health set by the pro-nuclear government of Japan is 0.11. Considering the difference in body weight and the water content in their flesh, these marine creatures were terminated by radioactive exposure. A Japanese saying about the predatory instinct translates as nature is harsh. Hermit crabs are natural-born killers whose feasting on victims was the last act of gratification in a microcosm without mercy or moral conscience. Inside the barren tide pools, shell-shielded hermit crabs skittered toward living Langostilla to prod and poke at the jerking joints. After hacking off a limb from its prey, a hermit crab would stumble off to dine in private, only to be accosted and robbed by fellow thieves. One pelagic red crab still had the residual energy to escape its attackers by darting backward, propelled by its curling its tail. Its blind retreat led straight to a gang of hermits that pounced on the meal. While most other shoreline species have hit dead end by now, these tiny monsters survive by tucking their thoraxes into the shells of dead mollusks, which serve as a shield against the elements and other predators. The calcium content of the stolen shells seems to block strontium, temporarily at least, affording the hermits a critical edge over other types of crabs whose bare flesh is vulnerable to radioactivity during molting. The undisturbed cherry blossom pink flesh of a rock crab revealed an utter lack of defense against radioactive seawater when bereft of its hard carapace. Though it smelled as salty sweet as any tidbit at a sushi bar, no hermit or gull came near it, here again indicating predators have a sensory alarm against radioactive flesh. Along 3 kilometers of an otherwise lifeless coastline, I saw thousands of twitching shells that housed hermit crabs, but only a handful of surviving rock crabs. This proportion is in stark contrast with 2 years earlier when rock crabs were a dominant species in tide pools, then brimming with marine organisms, including anemones, mussels, sea snails, giant keyhole limpets, colorful fishes, rock lobsters, and octopuses. The kill-off is by now over, and the radioactivity in langostilla flesh is probably dooming those hungry hermits. Even the most vicious survivors in this biological disaster will soon perish. The demise of marine life is caused by a misplaced faith in science of a non-oceanic species called Homo sapiens, which parasites off nuclear reactors to light and cool their own hermitages. The nearby San Onofre facility and distant Fukushima have both been spilling radioactive wastewater onto these magnificent shores of Southern California. It is astonishing how humans are as psychologically stunted as hermit crabs, wallowing in greed, myopia, and acedia. Predatory cruelty is indelibly stamped on our character, for it is the brute impulse that led to the original sin of rejecting our obligation to stewardship over life on Earth. As radioactivity and pollution annihilate the Mother Ocean, we come to understand without the strong safeguard of ethical principles, science is just a sharp instrument for robbery, bloodshed, cannibalism, and moral lobotomy. And listeners, it's a very long article. I'm not going to read all of it, but I'll read one last section. Lethal sandbars, dead pools. Judging from the similarity between radiation levels in the younger kelp washed ashore and the beached red crabs, lethal exposure occurred on the sandbars between 2 meters and 7 meters below sea level, and at a horizontal distance of 30 meters to 200 meters from shore. After journeying northward, the pelagic crabs clustered below the kelp beds on sandbars along the coastal shelf. Slightly further out, there are steep canyons where any crustaceans would drop into the jaws of dolphins and oarfish. The highest radiation levels were found in onshore samples of tall kelp of the Macrocystis fibrosus species and sea palm, or Eisenia arborea. The kelp on these sandbars are becoming increasingly toxic over recent years due to the bioaccumulation of radioactive isotopes carried by the California current. Older strands of kelp, which naturally serve as a major food source for coastal species, now has an opposite effect of killing everything that comes into contact with it, from shellfish to higher species. Radioactivity on the permanently underwater sandbars was confirmed by vast number of juvenile gastropod shells that washed up into the tide pools, many of them small enough to fit on a penny coin. The innumerable tiny cone-shaped shells of Conus californicus provide a telltale sign of offshore toxicity, since these predatory mollusks are concentrated on sandbars. Likewise, immature specimens of purple olive snail, Olivella biplicata, once used as shell money by Indian tribes, are also strewn in unusually large quantity over the beaches. There were a few Trivia salandria species of ribbed shell, similar in appearance to a cowrie. And in any case, you can go to rents.com and read this very troubling article in its entirety yourself. But it highlights why the work of Spintronics and John Searle and Russ Anderson is so important. Hi, Russ.
Yeah, right here.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very important that we use this technology that's been available to us since the mid-1940s, actually since 1946. This is the 70th anniversary of the first building and operating of the first SEGs, first Searle effect generators at British Rewinds and Repairs in London, England, United Kingdom, UK. And it's very important that people know that this is not a brand new technology. This is not blue sky technology. This is a proven technology that has actually helped people. It puts out healthful energy that replaces electrons in the body lost when you have a wound or a burn. First, the pain goes away, Professor Searle says. Then you have rapid healing. So there's no time for even scar tissue to form.
Wow. So when you go out flying on the weekends, Russ, sometimes I call and you'll be out flying. What do you think?
I did all this weekend except for today. We had a big cold front come through. So we went from like spring back to winter. I was outside down at Valley Forge, down the hill of Valley Forge in my shirt sleeves, flying my all-electric radio-controlled jets and helicopters, and it's a beautiful day flying with my buddies. And then coming out of the movies in King of Prussia, late last night, we were hit in the face by wind, like you couldn't believe, and it's still windy, and ice and snow, and unbelievable. Like, you know, if the summer changed to winter, yours is no disgrace, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Oh boy. So I fly all electric things because there's no compelling reason to use internal combustion at all. I mean, some of the mini jets give like a really good thrust, but you're still the idea of using fuel doesn't appeal to me on so many levels.
Right. We're also, held hostage to that technology now. Even every time I get in my car and
not if you buy a Tesla car, nice Model S or something like that, if you can afford it.
Exactly, if you can afford it, and I don't,
Underline if you can afford it about 5 or 6 times. They got to bring the cost down, and I believe they will with more mass, production. But that being said, if you've ever been in one and sat in one at any of these dealerships that are all over now, it's a really, really beautiful car, really sexy car. Everything is well thought out, and there's a reason why it's Motor Trend's Car of the Year for like 4 or 5 years in a row. It's an awesome vehicle. It's all electric. And you can charge up to that.
Let's do a shout-out to Elon Musk again to, invite him to step forward and really help with the mass production of the Searle technology. And
well, first the prototype, then the mass production. Got to crawl, then walk, then run.
Yes.
And It's a logical step-by-step process that we're going to follow, and I've laid it out so we can do it without wasting time and money.
And listeners, you can also contact me. Supporting the Spintronics project is part of our Earth Aid mission, and you can reach me through whitebuffalonation@gmail.com, and you can also contribute at gofundme.com/slope, and let us know that you want to support the work of Professor Searle and Russ Anderson and all of those who came before them, including Nikola Tesla. So,
Nikola Tesla, Thomas Townsend Brown, Victor Schauberger. Oh gosh, so many pioneers that helped change our understanding of the nature of space-time with their working apparati. They had working hardware, not vaporware, that we can study and learn from and reproduce.
Yes.
For all mankind.
So, as far as so what actually happens then? I mean, these that creates levitation. I mean, we're talking about.
Basically, you're creating an acceleration of the of a cathode to an anode because basically positive charges, the anode, are attracted to matter. Negative charges, the cathode, are repulsive to matter, but the forces are not equal and opposite. In fact, they're opposite, but they're unequal. That's why you get an acceleration in one direction. In a capacitor configuration, when that acceleration is directed upwards, and it doesn't take a lot of power to do that, power-to-weight ratio, it's been shown, you get levitation. Levitation and horizontal flight. The saucers I built starting in 1990 with 2-footers and then 3-footers back in the late 90s, and then we operated with a high-voltage unit that I built from a kit, about 100,000 volts at some tens of microamps, a big Cock-Walton voltage multiplier inside a clear container filled with mineral oil, so we didn't get any arcing all over the place like a little miniature thunderstorm. And basically, we had positive charges going to an anode tube, just like in the Thomas Townsend Brown's patent, number 2949550, that was granted August 16th, 1960. And it was filed sometime in July 1957. Anyway, about that time, they were doing experiments. Thomas Townsend Brown was doing experiments with James Frank King and Agnew Benson at Agnew Benson Air Conditioning Company, and they made air conditioners for nuclear reactors. Well, those air conditioners had no moving parts. It was all strictly electrostatic. And it was very important. They made air conditioners for submarines and nuclear reactors. So they were like a logical choice to do this type of force field propulsion research and work. And a lot of patents that really worked, obviously they work great, came from that research and before. There's a British patent from the early 1930s. All kinds of resources are out there that people can tap into.
Russell?
Yes.
I believe that, hang on, I want to welcome onto our conversation David Yurt. I believe he's on the line. Hold on.
Hi, guys.
Welcome, David.
Hi, Lisa.
Hi, David.
Hi, Bud. How are you?
Hi. Do you remember
Good.
Russell?
I'm great. How about yourself, sir?
Oh, man, just scrambling, trying to keep up.
Russell, I don't know if you saw the recent letter that that David wrote to Mark Lombard, the Director of Spent Fuel Management at the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission. But since, our end goal, one of our goals is addressing the nuclear debacle, I saw the letter and wanted to invite David to come on and speak about what he's communicated, and because he's also the creator of technology that ameliorates radiation, and is also part of our SLOPE science team. So welcome, David.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here.
So what was the gist, if you wouldn't mind, of what you communicated to the NRC?
It's pretty straightforward. The Dallas News announced that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is accepting statements of opinion with respect to the license that's been applied for by a Houston-based company called Waste Control Specialists. And what they're trying to do is get a permit to build another Yucca Mountain in West Texas on the New Mexico border, so they can store high-level nuclear waste. And the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is apparently beginning its environmental evaluation process and inviting public comment about the nature of the application and whatever sort of opinions that people in the public have about the issue. My response to Mr. Lombard basically is that I'm the Director of Science and Technology for a little privately owned research and development, technology development company called the Nova Institute of Technology here in Salt Lake City. And for 25 years, we've been working by ourselves and in collaboration with many other people to develop techniques for remediating the radioactive emissions that are generated by spent nuclear fuel, particularly high-level nuclear waste. And we have a technology that we developed in the 90s, built the prototypes, did the testing, gathered the data, published the results, sent it to the Department of Energy in 2002. DOE hired a team of scientists from MIT who took it to government labs in New Mexico, who replicated the technique and the equipment and the protocols and got the same results we did. They proved that it actually works. And then in 2005, while we were in the process of applying for a grant to fund the development of an alpha unit that we would actually deploy at a nuclear power plant, we got a call from people at the Department of Energy, the head of the Nuclear Remediation Division, who demanded that we cease and desist, who informed us that DOE's files were being purged of all of our documents, who threatened to have us arrested as terrorists under FISA if we decided to ignore his order to cease and desist. And we were blacklisted so that our laboratory was no longer permitted to have access to scientific samples. So we quit. And then 5 years later, after the Obama administration took over the White House, Secretary Chu was appointed to be the secretary for the Department of Energy. We got a call from some high-level bureaucrats in the Department of Energy who had investigated the files. My partner at the time in a company called Nuclear Remediation Technologies was a longtime member of the Republican National Committee, and he prevailed on Secretary Chu to evaluate the record. We eventually were exonerated of any wrongdoing and allowed to continue. And I was invited to present the technology to a closed meeting of the 26 department heads of the Department of Energy in September of 2010. 2 weeks before I was going to get on an airplane to go make this presentation, I was notified that the presentation had been canceled. And in a private letter from Dr. Kahn, who had set the meeting up and worked with me for a year to put the presentation together, he simply told me that he'd gotten so much pressure from independent contractors like Shaw Group and Westinghouse and General Electric and others, who are actually the contractors who build nuclear power plants and who are charged with managing nuclear waste, and who are the guys that were behind actually being paid to build the facility at Yucca Mountain. And some of the department heads inside the department didn't want it known as a matter of record that we'd even had the conversation. And then I got a call from a senior executive at Shaw Group who threatened me by saying that, we needed to get off the playing field because we didn't know who we were dealing with. So for many years, we've had a technology that works. It's independently verified by government laboratories, and it's been withheld from the public. We didn't understand for a long time why the technology we and others have developed, and I am personally familiar with 4 different methodologies that have been independently verified to remediate this radioactive waste stuff. We developed 2 of them, and other folks developed the 2 other systems that we're aware of. I co-moderated the Fukushima Solutions Conference at the University of Texas in Austin in March of 2014. And during that conference, we received information from people we work with in the nuclear watch world indicating that nuclear waste from the Fukushima plant had been processed into weapons-grade plutonium, which was being stored in the form of pencils in the cooling pond beneath Daiichi number 4. That's the one that blew up, the pressure vessel exploded, and rained down all that cesium-137 all over the Western Pacific. So we published that information and the satellite photographs that we'd received, and the Japanese government actually acknowledged that it was correct. A year later, on the 5th anniversary, on March 11th, 2016, we finally discovered what was going on with this stuff. What's going on in the nuclear power plant world is that the big guys who control that space are using the high-level radioactive waste that's produced in civilian atomic power plants as feedstock for the production of weapons-grade plutonium. And that's why we've never been permitted, no one has ever been permitted, despite independent governmental lab verification, to go in and use the technology to clean up the mess. Because the nuke boys are not going to let anybody get in the way of their feedstock. So when they tell us that they want to build a new nuclear storage facility, another Yucca Mountain on the border of West Texas and New Mexico, all we have to do is look at what happened at the WIP in February of 2014 to understand why it's a very bad idea. There are 3 things involved here. One of them is that the people who control this process do not tell the truth to the American people. They don't tell us what really happened. At the WIP site, for example, this experimental storage site in New Mexico, they had a big explosion. In fact, they had 2 of them within a matter of a few days, back to back. This nuclear waste storage facility is like a coal mine. It goes straight down in the ground, and then it has radiating corridors and storage units that go off axially around the center. They've stored 277,000 barrels of high-level nuclear waste in this facility over the last 15 years. And what happens with nuclear waste of that kind is a phenomenon that we refer to as neutron embrittlement. And the reason it's important, the reason nobody talks about it, you never ever hear the term on the 10 o'clock news or on anybody's mainstream media talk shows, it's because no one in the Western scientific world has ever invented a material that successfully encapsulates high-level radioactive waste with a life expectancy longer than 100 years. Most of them last fewer than 20 years. And the reason is because high-level material emits very high-velocity, massive particles called neutrons. At 7/10 the speed of light, when these neutrons impact the nucleus of the encapsulating material in the crystalline lattice, every one of those atoms is then catastrophically destroyed. And over time, this so significantly degrades the structural vigor of the encasement material that it simply fails. So, for example, at Savannah River, their liquid waste storage vessels are spheres 20 feet in diameter, made of stainless steel of a very special variety, 20 inches thick. Those containers, they're cracked. The failure of the containment has leaked high-level radioactive waste onto the groundwater. It has seeped into the aquifers. It is now in the Savannah River, and you can track it radiologically up and down the coast of the eastern United States for over 100 miles. That's one of 140 such sites in the United States, all of which suffer from precisely the same problem. What that means is that no matter how deep you bury it, no matter how thick your containment vessel may be or what it is made of, there is a 100% probability that within less than 100 years that containment will fail. What happened at WIP is that they used a limited kind of material to encapsulate the waste, and when it became sufficiently embrittled, the hydrogen gas that is a natural byproduct of the decay cycle escaped into the environment, became sufficiently concentrated that when they turned on the lights, it exploded. Now, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and the media and the people responsible for managing that facility lied to the American people. They said that that explosion was caused by hydrogen gas created by kitty litter used as an absorbent in the process. It's pure unadulterated nonsense. What happened, and it's happened again there, is that the containment vessels failed because of neutron embrittlement. So the fact that we have a technology, the fact we have a suite of technologies that have been demonstrated to efficiently remediate radioactive waste of virtually every kind is not being allowed for use in the marketplace, and instead the nuke guys are engaged in this proposition of exploiting the problem by charging the public to store this stuff, knowing that it's dangerous and that it's suicidal to bury it. Now, that just doesn't make any damn sense. So my letter to Mr. Lombard lays out the pieces and suggests that, if the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is going to satisfy the mandate that is imposed on them by federal law and their license, that they have no choice but to step up and allocate resources to implement various applications of this technology to solve the problem. And we offer to help them do it. We know what to do. We know how to do it. We know how much it costs. and we're not the only ones. So nobody should put up with any application that pretends to do the public a favor by burying this stuff, and I don't know where it's buried or how it's encapsulated. It's just insane.
So you have been able to get your ability to produce this technology again, right?
We have not obtained funding from anyone, but
not
we know
funding.
what to do, and we know how to do it. We've built the prototypes. We've conducted the experimental protocols, and we have the data. It's been so long in the process, Lisa, that several of our best scientists have died. I mean, we're old guys, We're running out of time.
Is there a way to crowdfund it?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, the issue that we've always had to cope with here is the threat of having the technology confiscated, classified, and impounded under national secrecy orders because it qualifies under the broadly defined category of national defense. I mean, the nuclear guys are not the slightest bit reluctant to do whatever they have to do to keep us off the playing field. We've run this up the flagpole 4 times now in the last 25 years. And we've come away with being threatened to be arrested under FISA as terrorists. Give me a break. So the issue becomes, how do you do crowdfunding for a technology that has exposure under national security rules? How do you do that? I mean, here's what we're looking for. It costs $1.9 to $2.2 billion to build a 1,000 megawatt nuclear power plant. We know those numbers because they're trying to build one right here in Green River, Utah. It isn't going to happen,
wow.
but we know what the numbers are. It costs $10 million, not billion, $1 million over 3 years to design, engineer, fabricate, test, and scale up prototypes that can be used in initial limited operation and eventual beta tests that are full-scale tests, so that the material is remediated on-site in real time as it's produced. You don't have to transport anything anywhere.
Wow. So how do interested parties contact you? And
well, they're welcome to contact me at the Nova Institute of Technology website. We have a contact page there. They're welcome to contact me there, www.novaiot.com. What we would love to be able to do is find an opportunity with the right kind of capital and the right kind of technology partners so that we could design, engineer, build a full-scale apparatus and then release that information to the public in the form of a documentary that helps them understand that the storage of nuclear waste is no longer necessary. Once that happens,
right,
then the generation of nuclear power becomes a much different conversation. Until it happens, by no extension of the imagination does atomic or nuclear power by any means qualify as a green technology.
Absolutely.
There are nuclear power plant designs that we've known about for a long time that involve technologies such as molten sodium thorium reactors. The INEEL and Dr. Otis Peterson have been running one of those babies up in Idaho out in the middle of the lava fields for the last 15 years. They had a little 10 megawatt unit that's been running up there, and it's an absolutely wonderful bomb-proof little operation. It's absolutely seamless. It'll never go critical. It'll never melt down. It doesn't require anywhere near the kind of containment because it operates at very low relative temperatures, in the hundreds of degrees centigrade instead of in the thousands. The Chinese have dedicated $500 million and are now manufacturing molten salt thorium power plants that fit inside a 40-foot freight container, and they are building them and distributing them and deploying them in remote regions to produce power for people who have no access to a grid. They are doing it now. Doesn't change the decay cycle. It means that, you've got 200 or 300 years to find a way to remediate the waste that they produce because it's still physics. But the thing that makes them excellent as alternatives is that there is no possibility for a Fukushima using one of those units. It just doesn't exist because of the physics. One of the reasons it isn't being done in the United States is because it doesn't produce fissile waste that can be converted into weapons-grade plutonium. It doesn't satisfy the feedstock demand. And that's why the nuclear establishment has resisted doing it. So,
well, and there are some who say that there's some who say there's an actual eugenics program going on globally that aims to eliminate a great portion of life on this planet, which is mind-boggling, but...
Well, I don't know anything about that. That's not something that I know anything about, and it's not something that I really pay any attention to. But as far as the science of this is concerned, there are things about the way nuclear power is generated based on the design of nuclear power plants that are supposed to take advantage of new materials and new techniques and new science. This stuff just doesn't make any damn sense. I mean, here's a case in point. When you build a power plant, you use nuclear fuel rods to generate heat, and that heat is then used to turn water to steam, and the steam is used to drive turbines, and the turbines are used to drive generators to produce electric power, right? So they take a tube of a material called zirconium, and zirconium is the very best material available in anybody's lexicon for containing these little jujubes, these little pellets that are made of enriched thorium and enriched uranium. And they mix them about 4 parts thorium to 6 parts uranium, and they put them in these tubes, and they put those tubes into a proximity with each other. It's called a nuclear pile. And then they use coolant and graphite rods inside and between these tubes to keep the heat down. So if the heat gets too high because they're not cooled sufficiently, then you get a Fukushima event, you get a Chernobyl event, you get a 3 Mile Island event. Because when those fuel rods get too hot, there's still enough uranium in there for it to go critical. That is, to take an out-of-control nuclear decay reaction and go ballistic with it. They add thorium to it to try to moderate that, and the reason thorium-only reactors are not so dangerous is because they're incapable of self-sustained criticality. You can't get there from here with thorium. But these nuclear fuel rods containing the fuel pellets, after about 15% of their useful life cycle, have to be literally taken out of the nuclear pile and put in these big storage ponds, and these big ponds full of water. You can see them down in the water they actually create a brilliant blue aurora around the rod because of the amount of radiation that's being emitted by the material. And the reason they retire them is because the neutron embrittlement on the zirconium fuel rod gets to the point where the fuel rod structurally fails, the material begins to leak out through the cracks, and they can't moderate the heat any longer. They have to take them out of there. 85% of their potential energy value goes unused. There have been several scientific papers that say that companies like Energy Solutions and Control Management and other companies have been recycling these nuclear fuel rods so that they get greater life expectancy out of the material. We see absolutely no evidence anywhere in the real world that suggests that that is actually a practice, that anybody has a technology sufficiently robust to handle that material and reuse any of it again safely. It just doesn't happen. It's a lie. So when Fukushima occurs and you've got ponds full of nuclear rods suspended down in the water, the reason they had so much trouble there is because when the water leaked out, those babies got so hot and their structural integrity was so degraded that they couldn't run the risk of trying to lift them out of what was left of the pond at the risk of having them completely disintegrate and spill those pellets everywhere. And it's still a problem 6 years later. They're still pouring 100,000 gallons of cesium-137 contaminated water into the ocean every day. There are 4 million garbage bags filled with high-level nuclear waste, stuff that was scraped off the top of the landscape in a 20-kilometer diameter all around that power plant, stored in bags, and those bags are stacked up on the beach. They don't know what to do with them. In the last monsoon, dozens of those bags were picked up by the wind and whipped out over the countryside, broken open and recontaminated. So the notion that you can engage in nuclear power production and generate this waste material and then not deal with the issues related to how you remediate the emissions that they produce is utterly irrational. It's all political. We don't know how to penetrate this egg. We've been in the game for 25 years, and every time we've tried to do anything with it, we've dealt with, government ministers and former ambassadors and all kinds of celebrities and influential financial people and political people, and nobody ever hand carries this thing into the middle of the arena in a way that allows us to even have access to the problem, much less to do anything to deal with it. Japanese Prime Minister Abe sent a personal emissary to deal with folks that we're working with in Colorado, promising that we would be invited and allowed and protected. And the minute we responded with our documentation, he became unavailable and invisible. It never happened. So we're open to suggestion. We'd love to have an opportunity to deal with somebody to start doing something about this problem. But the only thing we can do still is to make this kind of information available to the public by whatever means, by the internet, by Facebook, by blogs, by publication of one kind or another, circulate the information so people understand what's really going on here. And the only reason that makes any sense is because at least we give somebody whose mission in life it is to help solve this problem the information they need to do something effective. We run the risk of being personally targeted by the same people that have been threatening us for 20 years. So it's a nasty business.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And it takes me back to when was it that nuclear power actually began? Because I remember Professor Searle talking about how they knew they had choices right then and there, you know?
Look, we have a patent that was issued to Dr. Edward Teller, who was one of the principals of the Manhattan Project in 1951, that contains all the essential elements of a molten salt thorium power plant. That was in 1951. This is 2016. This is 65 years later. And there is one of those in an experimental operation in Idaho, and nothing going on in the general market with respect to power production that recognizes the potential. The Chinese have got them. The Israelis have got them. We know other people have got them. The Chinese are building them and deploying them, which means that we're at least 5 years behind the curve.
So why don't the Chinese step forward to fund the technology that you have?
They don't need us. They've got their own program. They've got really good scientists. They have excellent technology. They can manufacture any bloody thing they need. They don't need us.
But are they ameliorating their radiation? Are they ameliorating their radiation?
No, they're not. They're not treating their radioactive waste any different than anybody else because they don't know how. But they're replacing coal-fired power plants. Look, it's a matter of priorities. What the Chinese are trying to do is drive their economy. If it hurts people along the way, that's another problem. You know, it's a monolithic governmental structure, and it really isn't conscious about the impacts that are exerted on people. They're having real trouble with coal-fired power plants because the air is so contaminated, it's killing their people. And we have a project underway now to apply one of our new technologies to remediate the oxides of nitrogen and CO2 and other things that come out of their smokestacks using the new technology. We're working with some folks over there now. But, you know, this nuclear power plant thing is really scary. I mean, we're now 5.5 years out from Fukushima, right? And what we now see, just in 5 years, despite the immensity of the Pacific Ocean, what we're seeing now is the death of 40% of the corals in the Western Pacific and the contamination of food stocks all the way around the rim and down the western coast of the United States. It is a matter of normal practice now along the western seaboard of the United States for the EPA to impound bluefin tuna that are brought in by the fishing boats out of the northern Pacific. They're so contaminated with cesium-137 that you don't dare eat them. They can't allow them to be sold. And yet in Japan, you know, they're bringing those babies in and slicing and dicing and selling them and making sushi out of them. I mean, it's just nuts. So, you know, it's already having a huge, demonstrable effect on the baseline of the food chain. That means that we're in pretty serious trouble here, and nobody's doing anything about it that's effective. I mean, you know, when you mount a great big protest in front of the White House, the only thing that feels any pressure is the grass and the concrete. They don't care. We've got to find a different way to bring pressure on this thing. And if information is the way we do that, then that's the game we'll play.
Yes. Yes. Russ, thoughts, questions?
It's like that scene in the original Planet of the Apes that I first saw back in 1968, when Charlton Heston is looking up at what's left of the Statue of Liberty on a blown-up shoreline, and he says, quote, "You maniacs, you blew it up. Damn you all to hell," unquote. That's us.
Well,
yeah.
You know what? We can't penetrate that egg without having the support of some real special people. We understand the game, we understand the politics, we understand the methodologies. You know, we wrote the Ho Chi Minh Guerrilla Warfare Handbook. We know how the game is played. And in order to be effective about this, one of the things that we've been doing is to attack it from a different point of view. We've had part of this conversation before, Lisa. We're in the process of going through the certification of a new kind of radiation detector product. We found a new way to use some really, really leading edge technologies to detect even the most minute radioactive emissions, particularly those that are generated by food, including milk and fish and meat. And the reason we designed this is because we want it to become so effective and so inexpensive and so convenient that millennial helicopter moms can walk up and down the food aisle in the grocery store and discover which, if any, of the foods that they're getting ready to buy are radioactively contaminated. If it were reported by 100,000 millennial mothers in 1 week that the food stuff they found in their grocery store was contaminated radioactively, that would exert an extraordinary effect on the supply side of the food chain. It would compel the suppliers and therefore the growers and producers to do something about the problem at risk of having their products disenfranchised. People are not going to feed contaminated stuff to their kids if they know it's contaminated. So we're doing that, and we're not alone. There's a group of people in Japan, more than 50,000 of them now, who regularly contribute video of their own personal surveys, tests, and discoveries using whatever means are available to them, digital movie cameras and cell phones and Geiger counters and whatever. They're walking around up and down the countryside all over Japan, taking pictures and recording data and sending it to a website that memorializes how contaminated things are and where the contamination is located. The Japanese government has been trying for 3 years to shut that website down, and every time they do, it pops up again somewhere else. So we're about to take that thing to a point of real development. We're pushing very hard with friends of ours to make it possible to create a radioactive website that's akin to YouTube so that people can see it and they understand it and they know what to do about it and they have a place to share it. If we can't get these guys to pay attention to the science, then we're going to bring some pressure. And we're going to do it by shining very bright lights on the food chain in a way that's really irresistible. One way or the other, we're going to bring some heat.
Wonderful. So
Great. Great stuff.
And that is
So have you been able
that could be crowdfunded. So we're working on
All right.
that now. We've got some really good people who are finishing up the presentation materials and putting all the stuff together. And when we get ready to launch, we'll get in touch with you and people who are in your network to dial this thing up so that when we come to Kickstart or one of the other funding sources, that plenty of people will become aware. I get requests on the website almost every day from people who want to know where they can get one of these things. I've identified them on my personal website, and every time we have a little bit of activity, my website gets taken down. And we've got a good webmaster. We now have it on a co-hosted site that's very secure, so it's going to take some real doing to take it down the next time. But, we're being watched. We know that, and I don't give a damn. Because at this point, I'm old enough and I'm pissed off enough about it that I just have no tolerance with it. We got to solve the problem.
Yes, and especially since it is solvable. There's
the solution's been there for a long time. It's not about the technology. It hasn't been about the technology for decades. It's all about the politics and the power. And I don't know whether the Donald is going to have anything to do with it or not. But one thing's for sure, one way or the other, we're going to get their attention.
good. We're coming down into the close program. Russell, any closing thoughts, comments, questions?
Just one, that we have to rely on ourselves. We can't rely on big business. We can't rely on government. We can't rely on the media. We can't rely on politicians. We can only rely on grassroots organization of you and me and everyone we know and people we don't know, and say, if you want a better world, seek us out. If you want a world free of radiation pollution, seek us out. And, that is very correct. It's never been about the technology or lack thereof. We have the technology to ameliorate radiation. We have the technology to ameliorate pollution. We have the technology that will make us independent of any foreign oil, which we're pretty much there now already, but independent of carbon fuels and the massive environmental destruction they cause and everything else, and health effects to our own bodies. We have the technology to heal our bodies, to heal the planet. And I certainly, can call myself an authority on Searle effect technology and spintronics that can help ameliorate many problems in one fell swoop. Health, radiation in the environment, energy, clean, cheap energy, my gosh, propulsion, even to star travel. And, we can have a golden age right now if people just step up to the plate and take a swing.
Thank you. David?
Yes, ma'am.
Thoughts you'd like to leave with listeners?
Sure. Look, everybody cares about the planet we live on. Everybody cares about the food we eat and the water we drink and the air we breathe. Everybody cares about wellness, increasingly aware of its importance and how to deal with it. But the fact of the matter is that people can't do this kind of stuff on their own. It takes a village. And in an era when misinformation and disinformation is part of the strategic toolkit that the takers use to maintain control and exploit these problems, you've got to have access to information that's independently verified, and that isn't part of some whacked out, kooky, lunatic fringe agenda, you've got to be able to find out what's real and what's reliable and what's feasible. And we try to do that, and I know you guys do as well. And we really welcome the input of sincere people who have access to resources that we may be able to work together to apply to solve the problem. It takes a village, and we'd like to welcome all the good guys to come join us. The bad guys are listening too, and we just say to them, you're on the wrong side of the equation. You may make it more difficult. It may take longer. It may be more frightening. It may be more expensive. But in the end, clear-thinking, rational people of goodwill will come together and find a way to take care of this mess. And we're prepared to give them everything we have to help make that possible. So we invite their participation. They know how to get a hold of us, and we'd love to hear from them.
And David, we might also point out that one argument you could give to the quote unquote bad guys, they have kids too, and their kids, are going to inherit an earth that is going to be of our making. What kind of earth will we decree or bequeath them? Will we have a ruined earth or a thriving earth?
Well, we know what we'd like.
Yeah.
We do what we can. And, some you win and some you lose and some you get rained out. This has had a pretty long burn rate, probably longer than most. But we have to do something. We have to find a way to do something together that makes a difference before we reach that tipping point. And we may already be past it. I don't particularly care to get involved in a bunch of polemics about, telling people the sky is falling. We don't know where the tipping point is. We don't know how many days in a row the ocean can continue to absorb 30 million tons of carbon dioxide every day without reaching a tipping point. We don't know where that is, but we know that it's closer than farther, because it's been going on now, and we're seeing the evidence of it. So, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you folks and participate with you and your listeners and do whatever we can contribute to the resolution of the problem.
If it's already the tipping point, maybe that is what is behind the scientific community's race to find a quote-unquote new Earth.
Time to pull a ripcord.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the thing is, we've had the technology to actually go there for a long time too.
Yeah, well, I think we need to learn how to straighten things out here and live together harmoniously before we ruin any other parts of the universe.
Amen.
I want to thank David and Russell. As I've said before, this program was born thanks to me getting let in on an email train between David and another scientist friend about how critical the situation with Fukushima is. And, people, we can't keep our heads in the sand and pretend that this isn't going on. If there weren't solutions, I suppose we could all keep our heads in the sand while the ship is sinking and, open another bottle of champagne or something. I don't know, fiddle while, the earth dies. But there are solutions. So please, David, again, will you give your website where people can find more information?
Sure. We have a website. It's found at www.novaiot.com, Nova Institute of Technology. We also have a telephone number there. If it doesn't ring through, just leave a voicemail message and we'll get it and we'll try to respond to it. If your listeners have access to resources that may be able to help move this agenda forward, we'd love to hear from them.
Wonderful. And likewise, Russell, would you give the website for Spintronics?
Yeah, it's www.spintronic, SPINTRONIC, generator, GENERTOR, spintronicgenerator.com. And you can get our contact info right off the pages there.
Wonderful. And listeners, we're going to be taking this next week off the air for the holidays, and we will be returning Saturday, December 3rd with our ongoing Standing with Standing Rock Savage Sovereignty Council, and then continue likewise with Sunday program, bringing you a solution there. But I have to particularly thank David and Russell for being part of the solution and for bringing real hope into these times. Thank you both very much.
My pleasure, Lisa.
Thank you.
And we're going to close with a short piece of music from Anton Miserak called Clear Running Stream. To become part of the Utopian Reality Slope Earth Aid mission, contact whitebuffalonation@gmail.com and visit wbnslope.weebly.com and our White Buffalo Nation Facebook page, and support the Slope mission at gofundme.com/slope. Your contribution helps keep this mission going as we work to get solutions to all people and life on Earth. Together, let's sustain life on planet Earth. That's yours, mine, and all of ours, on and in the land, waters, and air. Thanks for joining us. Thanks, Russell. Till next time.
Thank you, Lisa.
Yeah. Till next time, this is Fiava Lisa Wolf for Slope. Save and sustain life on planet Earth. Earth Aid now. Let's give the Earth and all her children freedom from fear, lack, and degradation, and bring a utopian reality now.